Hello YouTube, PhatPastor here. This video has been a long one in coming. Today we're going to be looking at 5 different HDzero Whoops, ranging from the Mobula 6 OG HDzero up to the 2 and 3S Mobula 7 HDzero and other variants in between. So let's get started. We'll jump right in.
Oh my God. They found me. I don't know how, but they found me.
Run for it, Marty!
First, I want to talk about what started it all, the Mobula 6 HDzero. This was my first HD Whoop with HDzero. I've had HDzero on tiny trainers and other 2-inch, 3-inch Tinywhoops, but this is the first 65 millimeter that I had with HDzero on it. All of these Whoops, there'll be links in the description to each individual Whoop's review. This is an overall shootout and comparison between the 5. The Mobula 6 HDzero, I'm going to refer to this as the OG. Some would argue and say you can't call this OG because you've made changes to it. Yes, I have made changes to it. I changed the connector to all of the connectors except for the Mobula 7, which has an XT30. All of them have been moved over to the Beta BT 2.0. Besides that change, the only other change on the OG Mobula 6 was I changed the ESC firmware to Blue Jay and brought it up to 48 Hertz and set active braking. It also was moved from the Gem Fan bi-blade props to the Gem Fan tri-blade props. No changes were made in the tune except for sliding the master multiplier up to 1.5.
The information on your screen are the specs for the flight controller, receiver, motors, props, camera, VTX, battery lead, and frame for this Whoop. Please pause this video for further review.
This is an excellent indoor flyer. I'm going to be comparing how this compares to the more closely to the what I'm calling the Mobula 6 Pro, which is running the Meteor 65 Pro frame with 35 millimeter props. With this has 31 millimeter props. This is a good all-around indoor Whoop racer. I recommend this if you want to get into Tinywhoop racing and have excellent video. There's not a lot of changes that need to be made on it. I like to fly Whoops everywhere. I like to fly them indoors, I like to fly them outdoors, I like to race them, I like to freestyle them. Let me say this about this HDzero roundup. This hobby is very subjective. What one person likes in a goggle, another person may not like that. I know some people that do not like shark bite style goggles, others that prefer box goggles, and then others that prefer to fly from a screen. So understand what you're going to get tonight is my opinions of these quads and my advice and my experience in FPV and Whoops, and hopefully you will gain enough information from what I'm going to give you here to make your own comparison and come to your own conclusions. The next one that I want to talk about, the second one in the Whoop roundup, is what I'm calling the Mobula 6 Pro.
The information on your screen are the specs for the flight controller, receiver, motors, props, camera, VTX, battery lead, and frame for this Whoop. Please pause this video for further review.
This is the same quad with the only changes being made that it's running a Meteor 65 Pro frame with 35 millimeter props. You can see with the spacing behind the two here that the OG is wider than the 65 millimeter. You can clearly see that the props are larger. These white props are larger than these Jim Fan blue props. Both of these quads, however, are 65 millimeters. From motor post to motor post, they measure 65 millimeters. So they're both still considered 65 millimeter whoops. This one, in my opinion, is it's an excellent all-around tiny whoop. It flies pretty good outside. No whoop is going to fly real good outside because of the wind. If you're flying them in wind, it's not like flying a 5-inch. Any whoop will not fly like a 5-inch. That's the problem that people are having with the Avata. Anyway, this is a great all-around whoop. The main problem with this whoop is tuning. This thing was a bear to tune, and it's part of the reason why this HDzero shootout has been so long in the making. On 4 separate days, I had video of my complete process of tuning this. Flights, and then changes in beta flight that I made in the filters, because that's primarily where this needs to be changed. The frame is softer and more floppy than the OG Mobula 6, so it causes issues in the tune. Now, let me say something about this before I get too much further into this. These 4 Tinywhoops, when it comes to the camera and the VTX, are no different. There is no difference in between them. They're all running the Whoop Lite VTX, and they're running the Nano HDzero camera. Now, there's the differences in video only between these is that this one, the Freestyle, is running the True RC Tinywhoop SMOL, the small antenna, and this one is running the ORT antenna. But as far as the VTXs and the camera settings, they're identical. Now, the other thing to understand is these 3 quads, the OG, the Pro, and the Mobula 7, are all 3 running the same flight controller and the same VTX and the same camera. So the only things different between these is sizes, motors, frames, and props. Back to the Pro. This thing was a pain in the butt to tune. Part of the problem was the floppy, soft frame that it had. What I run into, and I think it's important to talk about this in this shootout, what I've run into and others have run into with the tune of these Mobula HDzero quads, with the exception of the Mobula 7, it's really in a different league of its own. But because it is a whoop and it is HDzero, I am including it in this roundup. Here's my take on the tuning problem. Aaron Ciotti, Brandon's Baked Beans, and a lot of other people have been diving in to these tunes. I've seen on forums, and people have asked me when they went in to look, the filtering that comes on these from the factory is very odd as opposed to a standard 65 millimeter whoop. It has some serious filtering in it, and here's my take of why that's happening. My first HDzero quad that I put the whoop board in was the iFlight 3-inch Chimera. It was a long-range cruiser. One of the first problems that I run into with that quad was I couldn't get the GPS to work. I couldn't get it to lock. I tried everything, even ended up wrapping the wires from the VTX and copper shielding wiring. And the problem, and the truth just is, and this is, from what I understand, it's the same thing with Walk Snail, and it's the same thing with DJI. These digital VTXs put off noise. They're different than analog VTXs. The radio noise that the HDzero 200 milliwatt VTX put off was enough to interfere with the radio signal of the GPS puck on the back of the Chimera, causing it to never be able to gain lock. So understand, in these HD whoops, this is new territory. HDzero was the first people to come out with a bind and fly 65 millimeter HD whoop. That being said, there's technicalities that we did not anticipate. And I believe the noise that the VTX puts off, the electronic noise, I believe it's getting somewhat into the gyro and into the filtering of this board because it sets so close to the flight controller. I believe that that's part of the problem. I don't know a lot about tuning. I don't claim to know a lot about tuning. There are other people that know a lot more than I do, but I'm thinking, my belief is that the electrical noise and the extra weight that HDzero has in these whoops is causing us to have totally what would normally be odd tunes for Tinywhoops. So we just got to understand that we are dealing with a new technology, and we're dealing with a paradigm shifting piece of technology in our hobby. So we have to understand things are going to be different, and they are. This tuning, I'm going to put a picture up of the stock filtering of the Mobula 6, and then I'm going to put up the filters that I ended up with on the Mobula 6 Pro.
Opening up the OG Mobula 6, we see that the PID settings are identical as they come from the factory, with the only change that I made is raising the master multiplier to 1.5. Moving on to the filter settings, we'll see that this is the stock filter settings from the factory. The gyro filter multiplier is set to 0.75. Notice that the gyro notch filters are turned off. Notice the dynamic notch filter min and max frequencies. Moving on to the Pro PIDs, notice the master multiplier at 1.6. Now the filter settings. The gyro filter multiplier is set to 1, and the D-term multiplier is set to 1 also. I turned on the gyro notch filter 1 and 2, and I turned the max frequency up to 700. This seemed to help and make it fly better. I know that this is strange PIDs, but here I'm going to lower the gyro notch multiplier to 0.85. This was my final tune, and what I ended up with flying the best.
As you can see, it's quite a bit more filtering. Let me know in the comments below. I believe this is the all-around most versatile Tinywhoop of this shootout. It can freestyle, it can race, it can fly indoors, it can fly outdoors. The caveat is, and understand that if you go down this road, you will probably run into some rather odd and difficult tuning. But if we can get it figured out, we can figure out what's going on with it, I think this is a way forward for a lot of people. Now, that being said, I like to race, I like to fly indoors, I like to fly outdoors, but I also like to freestyle Tinywhoops indoors. I'm not at the point of head from infinity loop, and I'll never be the fastest racer, and I'll never be the best freestyle, but I love it, I enjoy it, I have fun with it. So third up on the HDzero Whoop Roundup is my attempt at a freestyle 65 millimeter whoop.
The information on your screen are the specs for the flight controller, receiver, motors, props, camera, VTX, battery lead, and frame for this whoop. Please pause this video for further review.
This, at one time, was on a 75 millimeter frame. It was my HDzero 75 millimeter 1S. I just didn't like the way it flew. it didn't really fly that good outdoors, and it didn't fly good at all, in my opinion, indoors. So I took it and moved it to the standard Meteor 65 frame. This quad is probably the most different. This quad was built all from parts. This was not a bind and fly. I built this quad myself. Every part on this quad was purchased from Tinywhoop. Big shout out to Jesse Perkins on that. He is a legend in this hobby. This is running the Beta F4. The main reason why I picked this flight controller is because of the plugs for the motors. All of the others all have soldered on motors. And I wanted a flight controller that I could change motors without any problems. And this has been that quad. I know a lot of people say you can't trust the quality control of Beta FPV, but I'm here to say that Happy Model ain't much better. The key thing is buy it from a reputable company like Tinywhoop. You buy this flight controller from Tinywhoop, and Jesse Perkins is going to stand by it just as much as he'll stand by a Happy Model flight controller, or just as good as Newbie Drone will stand behind their B-Brain flight controllers. So this one has a different flight controller. It is running 25,000 kV Unibale motors. Now, this quad will continue to change and adapt as my freestyling abilities grow. I intend to put the 0802 Tinywhoop 30,000 kV motors on this whoop. This is my preferred freestyle whoop. The frame is durable. The flight controller has been solid. Now, something that is different. And thank you, I don't say this very often, but thank you to Beta FPV, because Beta FPV helped me in the tuning of the Pro, because a lot of the filtering that came stock on this flight controller was some of the filtering that I put on the Pro frame, and it helped. If you want an HDzero indoor 65mm freestyle whoop, in my opinion, this is where you should go, because you can change motors. If you bend a motor bail, or you bend a motor shaft, or slip a bail, or drop a magnet, which happens because we bang these things around, changing a motor on this is as easy as unplugging it and removing 3 screws. So this is why I have this set up this way. It's because I want the ease of changing motors, and this is what the Beta FPV board gives me. There's a link to this board. I'll put a little picture up on the screen of it. There's a link to this board down in the description below. This quad is a great quad. I would not use this quad for racing. It's just too powerful. It's going to be hard to control and turns and in tight places. But as far as Matty flips, power loops, fun freestyle indoors, this is my recommendation. And I'm calling this the Beta HDzero 65. The fourth one in the roundup is actually the last one that I purchased, and it is the Mob Lite 7.
The information on your screen are the specs for the flight controller, receiver, motors, props, camera, VTX, battery lead, and frame for this whoop. Please pause this video for further review.
I really like this quad, but I have to say this quad is not my favorite in any category. This may end up being my favorite gorilla whoop. I plan on taking this to Gatlinburg, Tennessee, and Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, and doing some gorilla whooping. It is somewhat quieter. It flies much better outside than the OG Mobula 6. It flies remarkably better than the Mobula 6 Pro. This quad, the main difference of it is it's got 1.5mm motor shafts spinning a 40mm bi-blade prop. I tried tri-blades on it. To me, it did quieten it down, and you'll see that in the sound test, the handling, to me, it did not add any performance. This is running the Happy model EX 1002 20,000 kV motors. This quad is a great park flying, warehouse flying 75 millimeter whoop. This, I would probably classify it as my cruiser. If I wanted a cruising HDzero Tinywhoop, this is why I have the ORT antenna on it, because I'm going to take this further than I would the other quads. This is a great quad, though it's not my favorite in any category. It is still an excellent bind and fly 75 millimeter whoop. For those of you that prefer 75 millimeters over 65 millimeters, which I don't, this may be the HDzero Whoop for you. Remember, this is all about your preferences. It's subjective to what you like. What I like may not be what you like. So this is a great whoop. It has plenty of power. You have the bigger battery tray, so you can get longer flight times. This has its pros over any of these. It'll fly minutes longer than the Pro or the OG, and especially the Freestyle. Lastly, the Mobula 7 2 and 3S.
The information on your screen are the specs for the flight controller, receiver, motors, props, camera, VTX, battery lead, and frame for this whoop. Please pause this video for further review.
This quad is one of my favorite quads, hands down. It's all around awesome, in my opinion. The camera being the bigger camera and the newer V2 HDzero camera, the image is better. It looks better. Though they have the same sensor, the lens on this is better. It flies better in a little wind. It freestyles better. Because it's 2S or 3S, you get longer flight times. For in my opinion, the only downside to this quad is it doesn't fly good inside. It's a little big for flying inside. It would not do good flying in a tiny whoop race. The 65 millimeter is much better. You put this thing on a 3S battery and it becomes a little screamer. This is perfect, in my opinion, for freestyling playgrounds. This is good for freestyling indoors through cube gates, stairwells, things like this. The 65 millimeter is great for that. But if you want to rip a playground, a park, your backyard, or your garden, this, in my opinion, should be the whoop for you. Now, if you watch this video thinking that I was going to tell you which of these 5 HDzero whoops was hands down the best overall or the best whoop, I'm not going to give you that. I can't. It just wouldn't be right of me to do that. It would be awful presumptuous for me to tell you definitively which one of these 5 whoops was the overall best, because it's subjective. What do you want it for? Do you want to race? Do you only want it for racing? Or do you want it to be a cinematic? I think this, for doing little cinematic stuff indoors, I think this is the best. You put bi-blade props back on it, and it is accurate. It is dead on accurate. You can shoot little tiny gaps. So this has its strengths in whoop racing, and even as a tiny 65 millimeter Cinewhoop. This thing is awesome. It's excellent. It's excellent for this. Go on to Jesse Perkins' Tinywhoop. You'll see more about this. This thing is awesome for chasing RC cars and the key truck from Tinywhoop. It's awesome for that. This is an all-around workhorse. It's got its issues too, and tuning is one of those issues. This one is the best of the freestyle quads, but it's not a good racer, and it doesn't particularly fly good outside. This one is not the best flyer outside. It's not the best flyer inside, but it's the best cruiser. And if you want to do slow tree surfing, outdoor tinywhooping, chasing RC cars outside, or RC boats, or smaller ultra micro airplanes like you see up here, this may be your quad. This is probably what I'm going to use to chase some of my airplanes. And lastly, if you want to rip apart, in my opinion, this is the quad for you. It's kind of like fishing. A good fisherman doesn't have one lure in their tackle box. A good carpenter doesn't have one tool in their toolbox. I look at these HDzero Whoops as tools to help me achieve what I want to do. Do I want to race? The OG or the Pro. Do I want to freestyle? Then the Beta 65 Pro or the Beta 65 Freestyle. I want to fly outside. It's either the Mobula 6 Pro, and if I'm wanting to rip a little park or playground, then it's the Mobula 7 3S. If I want to cruise longer range outside, it's the 75 millimeters, hands down. Now, I'm going to cut to some video. I was asked to give a sound comparison. I did this the best that I could. I had a couple of these videos, a couple of these runs had gotten corrupted, and I had to go through quite a bit of effort to get the video back. That's what's taken it so long. But we'll cut now to a sound test, and I'll do the voiceover telling you my thoughts on the sound level of these quads. And some of you are asking, well, what does that matter, how loud they are? Well, it matters to someone that's wanting to fly them in a neighborhood where neighbors just get upset. This one may be your huckleberry, if that's what you're wanting. If you're wanting a quiet, cruising style whoop that can do a little freestyle, handle a little wind, this may be your huckleberry. Why a sound test? This video is to people all over. I have subscribers all over the globe. People in Europe, people in New Zealand and Australia, and regulations are different. Things are different. So the size of the quad and the noise that the quad makes a difference. So that's why we're doing the sound test. We'll cut to some flight video. Cruising. That was real close to the camera. I almost hit the camera. The wind picked up. Cruising. That's full speed, full throttle passes. This is the Beta6 HDzero tri-blade gym fan prop. Sound test. Stop. Mobula 7. Mobula 7 ASI tri-blades. Mobula 7 2S tri-blade props. Cruising speed. I ordered 4 of the Eachine UZ65 frames. The Crazy Bee standard flight controller, it was too tight. The flight controller would fit inside the frame, but there was no dampening, and it caused horrible tune issues. So to those of you that were looking and wanting to know about the Eachine UZ65 frame for this, it just didn't pan out. I'm going to try an analog. I'm going to try to do an analog build with that, because I had one of the bind and fly UZ65s, and it was a pretty good flyer. This has been my HDzero Whoop Roundup. I want to thank you for watching. I want to thank you for your patience. If this video has helped you in any way, would you think about giving me a thumbs up? And if you like my content, how about you hit that subscribe button? As always, thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. And remember, keep flying and rise up and meet me in the air.